friends. AS Choir welcomes you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Dan Donovan. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for the entrance hymn.
Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all.
And with your spirit.
Let us now acknowledge our sins and so prepare ourselves to celebrate the sacred mysteries. Let us pray. O God, who by the abundance of your grace give increase to the peoples who believe in you, look with favor on those you have chosen and clothe with blessed immortality those reborn through the sacrament of baptism. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen. In today's first reading, we will get to know that people were amazed by the boldness and works of Peter and John. They got ordered to leave the council and not to teach anything in Jesus' name. first reading, a reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 4, verses 13 to 21. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. But since they could see the man who had been healed standing there with them, there was nothing they could say. So they ordered them to withdraw from the Sanhedrin and then conferred together. "What are we going to do with these men?" they asked. "Everyone living in Jerusalem knows they have performed a notable sign, and we cannot deny it. But to stop this thing from spreading any further among the people, we must warn them to speak no longer to anyone in this name." Then they called them in again and commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John replied, "Which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him? You be the judges. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." After further threats, they let them go. They could not decide how to punish them, because all the people were praising God for what had happened. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I praise you, Lord, for you have answered me. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. The Lord is my strength and my might. He has become
In today's Gospel reading, we will hear that Jesus appears to his disciples and asks them to proclaim the good news to the whole creation.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Now after Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him, while they were mourning and weeping. But when the disciples heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, Jesus appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking in the country. And they went back and told the others what they did, but they did not believe them. Later he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were sitting at the table, and he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And Jesus said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news of to the whole of creation." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
With today's Mass, we come to the end of one of the most solemn weeks of the Christian year, Easter week. The liturgy invites us to see the whole of the Easter season, and especially this week, as a prolongation of Easter in its message of life and joy. The Gospel readings this week have been taken from the Gospels of Matthew, Luke, and John, and have contained accounts of various appearances of the risen Jesus. Today's reading from Mark offers a kind of index or summary overview of the other readings. This year, more than most, we can't help but remember that Easter is inseparable from Good Friday. Jesus was betrayed, abandoned, and condemned and put to death on the cross. Had his story ended there, it would have been one more account of a good and innocent man crushed by the power of the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of just how vulnerable we all are. Sickness and death are part of life. We are all destined to suffer at some point in one way or another, and in the end, to die. Where we differ is how we see and respond to that suffering, and whether or not we believe that death is the last word about us. Easter proclaims that it is not. It affirms that Jesus lives, and that his triumph over death has implications for us all. People sometimes wonder why the cross with the dead Christ hanging on it should have come to have such a central place in our churches and in our homes. In the eyes of faith, the crucifix speaks both of God and of human life. Although Jesus is a human being like us in all things but sin, he is also and inseparably the eternal Word or Son of God in human form. In him, God entered into and made his own a human life in all its dimensions, including joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain. In living his life as he did, Jesus gave our lives a new and deeper meaning. He suffered because of his fidelity to the mission entrusted to him by God. Because that mission involved his communicating to us the mercy and compassion, the love and forgiveness of God, we can say that he died for love of us. Although we all have a cross to bear, whether it be that of pain and suffering, of poverty and hunger, of abandonment and loneliness, as we meditate on the story of Good Friday, we're invited to find in it a source of strength and peace, a model of compassion, mercy, and love. The cross of Jesus can never be understood in isolation. It has to be seen in relation to the resurrection. Together, cross and resurrection affirm that our destiny is not death, but life. In dying with and in Jesus, we are enabled to rise with him to newness of life. As I was thinking of the devastation brought about by the present pandemic, I remembered a saying of Pascal, a 17th century French religious thinker, who once described human beings as thinking reeds. We are only reeds, he says, the most feeble things in nature, but we are thinking reeds. As vulnerable as, for example, as we may be in the face of a virus like COVID-19, we transcend it by our ability to think, to recognize what is happening to us, to take whatever steps we can and must take in order to protect ourselves, our families, and our communities from its ravages. As beings with a self-awareness, we are also able to confront the mystery of our lives and of the world. That same gift which enables us to be of service to one another opens us to the infinite mystery, the mystery that surrounds and grounds our lives, the mystery we call God, the mystery which Jesus encourages us to think of and to address as our Father. The message of Easter is a message of life and of hope. If that is true in a special way in regard to life beyond this life, it has repercussions in our present life as well. There is a pattern of human life, of undergoing experiences, of passing through periods of a negative nature to ones that are positive. A theme that comes back 3 times in today's gospel is that of unbelief. When Mary Magdalene told the disciples that Jesus was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. The 2 disciples who spoke with the risen Christ on the road to Emmaus informed the others of their experience, but they did not believe it. Faith is only possible through the presence in us of the Spirit, drawing us into a living relationship with Jesus. Such faith is never given to us simply for ourselves. It is meant to inspire us to live the kind of life to which Jesus calls us. Although our initial reaction to the current pandemic might well be one of fear and of self-concern, Easter invites us to renew our faith, to strengthen our hope, and to be generous in reaching out in whatever way we can to those who are the most vulnerable among us. Let us now in faith and trust present before God our needs. For all of us that are sharing in this Eucharist will deepen our faith in the saving power of the death and resurrection of Jesus, let us pray to the Lord. For victims of the COVID-19 virus and for their families, let us pray to the Lord. For families who find themselves under special pressure at this time, let us pray to the Lord. Gracious God, we ask you to be with your church, with the Pope, bishops, priests, and deacons, and with all your people, especially in places where the gift of the Mass is currently not available. As we come together today as a community from many different countries, we seek your guidance and your help. We ask this through Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
Pray, brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be made acceptable to God, the Father Almighty.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands but the praise and glory of the same, rather than could have fallen short.
Grant, we pray, O Lord, that we may always find delight in these paschal mysteries, so that the renewal constantly at work within us may be the cause of our unending joy. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit,
Lift up your hearts.
we lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation at all times, to acclaim you, O Lord, but on this day above all to laud you yet more gloriously when Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. For he is the true Lamb who has taken away the sins of the world. By dying he has destroyed our death, and by rising restored our life. Therefore, overcome with paschal joy, every land, every people exults with your praise, and even the heavenly powers with the angelic hosts sing together the unending hymn of your glory as they acclaim. You are indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and, giving thanks, broke it, gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
Immediately when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and once more giving thanks, gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you've held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that, partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Lord, remember your church spread throughout the world and bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis, our Pope, and Thomas, our Bishop, and all the clergy. Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with Blessed Joseph, her spouse, with the blessed apostles, and with all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and we praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him and with him and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all honor and glory is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
At the Saviour's command, informed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope of the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, you said to your apostles, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Look not upon our sins, but upon the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
May the peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
Let us offer one another the sign of peace.
Lamb of God,
You take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy to enter under thy roof, but only say a word, and my soul shall be healed.
since we cannot receive the Holy Communion, let us remember our first Holy Communion and also our best moment when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen
Of heaven and earth, Mother of God, and Mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart, since now I cannot receive him sacramentally. Be so good to place him spiritually in my soul, and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen.
after communion of St. Thomas Aquinas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having been pleased through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me, a sinner, and your unworthy servant, with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices, and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss when you will call me. I pray that you bring me, a sinner, to the indescribable feast where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true life, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say the prayer for priest of Saint Teresa of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purple with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Look with kindness upon your people, O Lord, and grant, we pray, that those you were pleased to renew by eternal mysteries may attain in their flesh the incorruptible glory of the resurrection. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Go in peace.
Thanks be to God. Lord Jesus, help each one of us to take our cross and help us to face the reality that every time our cross will give us pain and suffering, which will help us to grow in love. And at last, we will be able to rise with Jesus in newness of life. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who married thou didst bear. Alleluia. He is risen, as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you came to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Escriva, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Let's all make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.